So there's actually a lot of different things that fit under the umbrella of blended learning, a lot of different models. In our work, we've gone about trying to categorize and create a taxonomy that shows what those different models are. So one of the main examples of blended learning are what we call rotational models. Those can be anything from a classroom rotation, where often this is in an elementary school classroom. You'll have different stations in the room. And one of those stations will be online learning. So students will get broken into smaller groups, and they rotate between working with the teacher, maybe working on projects independently or with their peers, and working in an online setting. And there's then a schedule that just moves the students between those different stations. Another example of a rotational model is what we call a lab rotation, where students rotate between learning face-to-face with their teacher in the traditional classroom and then doing online learning in a lab setting. The flipped classroom, which many people have heard of, is also an example of a rotational model. You're just now rotating between learning in the classroom and learning online at home. So those are examples of rotational models. And in a lot of ways, we see those as being the models that are getting a lot of adoption, especially for schools that are looking for ways to improve the way they do core instruction. So the nice benefit of the rotational models is they really are just a nice add-on to your traditional instruction. You have part of the time students are learning the way that we've always taught them. So there's not, teachers can keep teaching and succeeding at what they do best and what they've been trained to do. But then you're incorporating in this online piece that just adds more personalization and more flexibility for the teacher. In contrast to the rotational models are what we see as being probably the more difficult models to implement early on, but the models that we see also being the most transformative. So some of the names of these models are things like the flex model, the enriched virtual model, or the a la carte model. These models really shift away from a traditional instruction to where no longer is the face-to-face time with the teacher the core medium of instruction. Really, the online instruction becomes the backbone of learning. So in these settings, students often are working the models just allow for more flexibility around doing things like competency-based learning, because students can all be working on their own individualized playlists of instruction. And then instead of rotating between online and face-to-face, they really move based on individual needs. So, often this looks like you may have in a flex model, for example, you may have a large learning space where there's lots of room, where lots of students are working online doing different things. And then those students pull out to work on group projects or pull out to get special interventions with the teacher if they're struggling, or they pull out to get mentorship experiences. So the online is really the backbone and the foundation of learning. And then the face-to-face really focuses on these much more personalized projects and activities that are focused on an individual student's learning needs. So there's a number of really interesting examples that have been emerging over the last few years. Probably the prime example that we point to is the Summit Public Schools in the California Bay Area. They're doing a flex model of blended learning. They're also doing that in conjunction with project-based learning. And I think they are really, pushing the frontier, pushing the envelope of how you use online instruction to really create a personalized learning experience for students. They're also very good at rapid prototyping and iterating on their model to figure out what works. In addition to Summit, if you look at schools that are really doing the more rotational models, where they're building on strong traditional instruction and then adding an online piece to augment and enhance that. A few examples that are prime in that area would be the Rocket Ship schools in the Bay Area, the Navigator Public Schools. There's a number of KIPP schools that are now moving in that direction as well. So those are some that are mainly focused on the elementary level and mainly doing the rotational model. In addition to that, there's a few others to mention would be the Innovations High School in Salt Lake City, which is a program that also does a flex model and that really gives high school students flexibility to work through their courses at a pace and in a manner that best meets their needs, and then also gives them much more time to work with teachers in an individual way and get mentorship from teachers. And what's really interesting about their program is how, they started off serving kind of position as an alternative school within the Salt Lake City School District, but they're now attracting a lot of students that maybe wouldn't be categorized as alternative education students, but just students that want that added flexibility and customizability of the learning experience. Another one to mention would be Teach to One. Teach to One is a nonprofit organization that partners with schools to set up what we call individual rotation models for doing middle school math instruction within those schools. So in Teach to One, they're probably one of the earliest and leading examples in this area. They have worked really hard to develop a big set of different types of learning experiences. They could be lesson plans, they could be online learning modules, just lots of different tools and resources for teaching students the math curriculum. And then students come into the school each day, and they have this large open learning space where they've got these different activities happening in different areas throughout that learning space. So as they go through each day, students learn, and then at the end of the day, they take a quick assessment to see, did you master the things that you were intended to master that day? And then that data goes back into their computer system, and their computer system then creates customized playlists for every student each day that directs them to the next day. What are the learning experiences you should have based on your interests, based on what you know and what you need to learn next, based on how you learn best. And so the computer system creates these custom playlists for students and also custom plans for teachers that basically tell the teacher, okay, today this is the group of students you're going to work with, and here's the thing that you're going to work on with those students. Aside from those, the Christensen Institute, we've also just gone around trying to catalog and categorize lots of different things that are happening around the country. So if you go to our website, blendedlearning.org, we have a database that you can search lots of different schools and see how are they doing blended learning. You can search by the model they're using, the grade levels they're serving, the demographics of the students they're serving, the resources they're using, and really find lots of different examples that range from charter schools to traditional district public schools, private schools, schools across the different grade spans, schools in rural areas, schools in urban areas and suburban areas. So just lots of different examples available there. Blended learning is still an evolving area. So there isn't a blueprint that says, here is how you do blended learning from start to finish. Just take this and hand it to your teachers and let them run with it, and it's all going to work great. There's still a lot of work being done to figure out how do we make these models successful? Because frankly, there's schools that are doing blended learning well, and there's schools that are doing blended learning poorly. Just blended learning on its own is not, just the fact that you're doing blended learning doesn't necessarily mean that it's good education. So there's a lot of work being done to figure out how do you make blended learning happen successfully, and also figuring out how do you measure blended learning? How do you quantify or qualitatively examine the results you're getting? One analogy I like to think of is that blended learning is to good education what wings are to an airplane. Just because a machine has wings on it doesn't mean the machine's going to fly or that it's going to fly well, but those wings are a key enabler of flight. And same thing with blended learning. Just because you're doing blended doesn't mean it's going to be good education, but the technology in the blend is what enables personalized learning. So with that caveat about blended learning, I would say that one thing we really emphasize is that schools need to approach blended learning with a planning and implementation process that is often different from what they're used to. You don't succeed in blended learning by creating a grand plan on paper and then just rolling it out on day one of the school year across all your schools and everything works great. Schools that are figuring out blended learning are usually using a very iterative planning and implementation process where they develop a plan and then they find low cost, low effort, cheap ways to go out and test what are the assumptions we're making in this plan, what's working and what's not working, and then they're continually reflecting and iterating and scaling as they find success, not scaling all at once. But often they'll start off with, let's find our early adopter teachers who are interested in this, give them some support, come up with a plan, run it. As it's working, we'll scale it and we'll expand it. As we run into roadblocks, we'll troubleshoot and figure out how do we adapt this to make it better. So just people should keep in mind, going into blended learning is an iterative process.